primarily. We've been around since 2007 when we published our first book. We publish in paperback and ebook, and much like Matt, we're an independent publisher. My background is more from the sort of agency side in terms of public relations, though, rather than the front side of book selling. But I have been a bookseller as well. I worked for a well-known high street store as a bookseller, organising signings and author events and stuff like that. It's my love of writing combined with those things, plus the skills of PR, that set me up to start Caffeine Publishing.
So what we want to try and do this evening is, everyone, how many people here consider themselves to be writers? How many of you consider yourself to be an author? Okay. So what we're going to talk about tonight, because we could talk all night actually, we're full of anecdotes and everything else, and we just need to tell you those, but we want to try and get you from, you've got a script and you want to turn it into that. Okay? And 25 years ago, there was really one way you could do it. You would go to an agent or a publisher, and they would say that you were very, very lucky that they were talking to you, and they would invest and they would put it in one place to sell it. Where was the one place that you could buy a book 25 years ago?
Bookshop.
Yeah, bookshop. A bookshop. Well, now, a bookshop, if there are any left, is the last place people go to actually buy books. Because roughly 70-75% of all books are sold from where?
Amazon.
Amazon. Yeah, supermarkets is a good point, but pretty much Amazon. And even the people who say they go to bookshops, they usually go to the bookshop to window shop and then they buy it from Amazon. The other thing that's changed is the way that you can get published. Because if you have a script, literally a Word document, you could publish it tonight. Because you can go on Amazon and you can press a few buttons and you can upload your book, and by tomorrow you're selling an ebook. And it's there. The problem is it's there with, what did we work out, 30 million books?
Yeah, there's latest reports from Amazon is there's 5,000 new titles published every day.
Every day.
5,000 a day. And that doesn't include, these are the ones just registered with ISBNs. Now, the majority of people who are self-publishing, I'm going to think I'm going to pay £100 for some ISBNs. They're going to do it without. So if you think of that, it's 5,000 with ISBNs plus probably, I would say, anywhere from 60 to 80% that won't have ISBNs that would be published on Amazon. So that figure could well be 8,000 or 9,000 a day appearing on Amazon. So your book will be fighting in that marketplace.
Do you think there's, if you hear the words traditional publishing and self-publishing, what do you think the differences are between the two?
What you just said, go into a publisher.
Is without an agent, without any other representation, you do it yourself.
Right.
And traditional publishing is with an agent, or maybe you contact a publisher or something.
Okay. And there are. I mean, that's still seen as the simple way of describing the two. But I think Darren and I would suggest that actually the thing has become completely muddled. So there's also a snob factor involved. If you say to someone, my book's been published. If you tell them I've published my own book, you get a very different reaction, because they just assume you've got a big pile of books in your garage that you're never going to sell. Whereas if you've been published, the idea is that someone's coming on your side and said you must be a brilliant author, therefore we're going to sell for you. And that pretty much stands. But I would suggest that there are a lot of self-published authors who are a damn sight better than traditional published authors and traditional publishers.
And there's many that started as self-publishers and have actually gained publishing deals because of that.
Yeah.
John Grisham actually started by getting a loan to print a lot of books from the university press and selling them out of the boot of his car. So, you know, people start in different ways and they find their audience and their level in different ways as well. And clearly, you know, John Grisham had something else to say and deliver. He was a one-book wonder. So, I mean, that's another thing that people have to think about when they're writing, whether they're doing this just because they've got one book in them, or whether they wish to do this as a career.
But the first thing we say really is the biggest challenge I face with authors is that they spend 5 years investing emotion and heart and energy and pain in an 80,000 word script, and they finish it, and they think, well, that's it, I've done it. I've done it. Everyone must surely love this book, because my Auntie Jones read it, and she said it was brilliant, and therefore I'm going to be the next John Grisham or Jojo Moyes. And what I often get, and I'm sure you get the same, is I'll get a one-line email saying, I saw your address on the web, here's my book, what kind of publishing deals do you offer? Well, I reject 50 proposals a week, and I'm a small publisher. So they're the ones I reject.
How many?
And that's weekly. And I publish probably 5 to 6 books a month. So my output's quite high compared to a lot of publishers. But that's still, that puts it in perspective for you. I can get upwards of 200 emails a week from people who want to get published.
The shocking thing about what Matt's saying there is that you've spent how many months writing a book? 6, 8 months, a year, 2 years, maybe longer. And you've just been so focused on the book, you've done all your research, you've got it all right, you've probably had it edited or read by someone, proofread, and then what you've done is you've just gone, you've just thrown that straight out by not researching the publishers, not finding out who they are, not taking a little bit of courtesy to actually see who deals within a publishing organisation with your books, let alone whether they're actually going to be dealing with your genre, or even if they're open for submissions. I was going to
say the hardest thing for writers is actually to move from the creative to the commercial. Because if you want to get published, I don't care if you self-publish, or you want an agent, or you want to find a small publisher, if you don't think about your word suddenly becoming a commercial property, you won't get a deal. Because on the self-publishing side, you won't have the entrepreneurial skills to sell it. And if you want to work with an agent or a publisher, what they want to know is, well, okay, if I invest in you, how am I going to get my money back? And that sounds a bit crass when you've spent all that time and effort writing something. But the truth is, if you want someone to invest in you, same as if you want someone to give you a job, you've got to perform for them. You've got to show them that they're going to get a return on that investment in you.
Having the manuscript isn't enough. 5,000 new books plus a day on Amazon. Having the manuscript isn't enough. It could be the best manuscript in the world. We've published some great books, and we've been behind some great books and pushed them and advertised them and put them on promotions, and still they haven't lit that blue touch paper and gone. So having the manuscript, even and having the publisher sometimes still isn't even enough. You need a fair amount of luck, but what you need also is engagement with your audience. And that was some of the areas where, when we have failed in the past, we have taken books on because they've been brilliant books, but unfortunately the authors weren't able to step up to the plate and be brilliant authors, and be brilliant marketers and brilliant communicators as well. And when I say that, I'm not talking about them sitting at home trying to do Amazon deals, this, that and the other. What I'm saying is that when they're public facing, when they're having to do PR, when they're having to go out into shops and do book signings, that's when they can't shrivel back into their little corner and wish they was just in the room on their own, because it was so much easier writing a novel. Writing a novel is the easiest thing you will do. It's the totally 100% easiest thing you will do out of this entire process.
And we can say that because we don't write. So it's very easy for us to say that.
I do.
Yeah. But let me give you 2 examples, okay? I've had two emails this week. The first was, here's a book, it's a serial killer, and it's a good page turner, it's compelling, and it's written by my wife. Okay? So I wrote back and said, I mean, God, why even waste it? Most people just, but I was just, why on earth is your wife not writing it? She's too busy. Well, actually, yeah, so, and you're like, well, what the hell? The next one was, I've written a novel, it's a serial killer, it's, engaged, blah, blah, blah. My writing style is like, I align myself with these books, I see myself in these categories. If you go in your local Waterstones, I would see myself here. And you're immediately thinking, okay, I haven't even read any of the script yet, but already here's someone who I know I can talk to about how we're going to, reach your audience, and you've thought about it. Because you're already positioning yourself. Now, again, it always sounds quite crass when you're talking about this, and there are always dangers, especially with the big publishers, where they're just trying to fit you in a certain box. So you say, I've written a romance novel, and they immediately want to make it look like Jojo Moyes, or I've written a thriller, therefore we'll make it look like Gone Girl, because that's what's working at the moment. But there's no reason you can't think carefully about who's going to want to read your book, because the truth is, if you put all that effort in, you do want people to read it, and if you want people to read it, they've got to buy it. And people are very choosy with their cash these days. What's out there, because if you're going to throw yourself in that market, writers tend to write in the areas that they read. It's very rare for a writer to distance themselves from the stuff they know. But I would suggest as well that there are two audiences for writers. There's what publishers like to think of as, you know, the 10% engaged audience. So it's people in this room who read. They might read 1, 2, 3 books a month or even a week. They go to the library, they go to bookshops, they read reviews, they listen to word of mouth, they listen to recommendations. And then there's the other 90%. And the other 90% go on holiday, usually with a Kindle now, and they download 5 thrillers or 5 romance novels. And then they might have 1 or 2 authors who they read all the time, but the rest is impulse. And it will be either what their friends just said, or what they've just seen on Loose Women, or what's 99p or free. Now, if you want to be a massive success, you have to try and find a way to engage with that 90%.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's really hard. And that's why a lot of writers then stick to particular genres like crime or romance, because they think it's easier to then engage with that big audience. For publishers like us, it's actually the people who stand out. It's the people who are different, because it gives us a story to tell. Because if you're just like everybody else, we can't make you stand out against Peter James. Because everyone will choose Peter James first because he's on the side of buses. So we have to create a story around your story. This is where the author comes back in again. Because the book, that's fine. But the author, what's the story around the author? So I would think very carefully when you get back to that proposal stage, and we'll talk about what goes in a proposal in a minute. Where do I fit into this? And do I want to fit into this? Because if you don't, go back to self-publishing, because you won't have to do any of that stuff. But if you want to work with a publisher, we sort of force you into it. It's quite nasty like that.
That's a very important point, though, because I had an author come to me, he wrote brilliant police procedural. He was a serving police officer. And he said, yep, all the way down the line, we were going to come out with it. He's a serving police officer, that's why this book is so authentic, etc., etc. He got to publication, he suddenly went, I don't think I can say that I'm actually a serving police officer. Can I say that I have been in the police? And suddenly the story started to disappear. It started to disappear from him. We had a great launch, actually. We did do well with it, but we couldn't maintain the momentum we could have maintained by actually outing him such as a serving policeman. We could have even used a pseudonym, and that would have been a good point to use a pseudonym, because it would be an unknown author. It would be like the, not Jack Ryan, the SAS guy, whose name? Andy McNabb, sorry, yeah. Andy McNabb scenario, where he's changed his name, but he has that authenticity behind him. And because he stepped back from that, he wanted to retain his own name on the cover. We just couldn't go ahead with the public relations story that we really wanted to, and that did actually harm the book itself, which is a shame, because you know, our dialogues have been great up until that point. But you know, we're not there to be ogres and force him into something that would harm his career, because his career is still as a serving policeman. And if anyone thinks that they're going to be an overnight success, well, look at Peter James. You know, look at J.K. Rowling sitting in coffee shops, pouring tears into her lattes until she'd been turned down by 23 33 publishers or something before she was picked up.
So we sound very negative. We don't mean to. It's just to try and, you know, when you finish a book, so many people just think, again, well, this is it, but it really isn't. That's the point where you really have to start working incredibly hard, and it actually forces you to use different skills. and that's very, very tough. Who's heard of Mark Edwards? Has anyone heard of Mark Edwards? Read any Mark Edwards?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mark Edwards is very interesting. He wrote what's classed as a psychological thriller. So he tends to write about couples, and one of them turns out to be a loony. I'm simplifying, but very modern and contemporary. And he wrote his first one. He published it on Kindle only on Amazon. And he left his job and he spent 6 months, 12 hours a day, tweeting, Facebook, blogging, basically just forcing everything into that Amazon book and watching the sales ranking go up. That's all he wanted. Google AdWords, Facebook ads, and that's it, for 6 months. And it became a #1 bestseller on Amazon, i.e. it got that #1 bestseller badge. And he sold X thousand of copies. Now the interesting thing is that Collins then came in and said, brilliant, you're already a success, here's a 3-book deal. So he was like, that's it, isn't it? You've made it. That's the pinnacle. Within 3 months he walked away because he said, you don't know how to market books. Because as soon as he said to them, well, how are you going to market this book? They said, well, we'll send it out for review to our friend at The Guardian, and we'll put some big posters on the Underground, and we'll give some free ice cream to people in Trafalgar Square, and we'll have a party, and we'll invite all our friends, and because you're already a success, so it'll just work. He's like, you haven't got a clue how to market a book. My audience are all on Twitter with me. And they said to him, well, aren't you just going to carry on and do that? He said, well, why am I going to carry on and do that and give you 90% of the return? So he walked away, gave him back the advance, and he walked away. And he's a very, very successful self-published author because he understood what his audience wanted.
They singularly failed to make the connect between the fact that he knew and understood his audience and they didn't. They just felt that audience would walk across the road from buying Kindles and walk into Waterstones and buy paperback copies. They weren't prepared to do that. It was a totally different type of readership, totally different type of audience that he appealed to.
But I think the important thing there as well is that the publisher expected him to do it. They just thought he'd still put in the 12 hours a day on Facebook and Twitter and blogging and everything else, and we could just reap the reward. So we're not talking about self-publishing, but it's an example of what you've got to commit and what you want to try and get out of it. There are plenty of authors I have who are great up until the point their book comes out. And then they ring you from flagship Waterstones in London and say, why is my book not on display? And you have to patiently explain that you're not Martin Amis or Will Self or Jojo Moyes. You're a debut author with a debut novel with the other 5,000 that have come out today.
Yeah.
And I'm really sorry, but we can't get you into that retail space.
How many bookshops do you know get 5,000 new copies in on the shelves every day? Apart from Amazon.
How many bookshops do you think closed in the UK last year? Nearly 2,000. I didn't know there were 2,000 left.
It's not anymore.
No.
It's under 2,000.
Under 2,000 now.
Oh my God.
The biggest book chain in the UK, you mentioned it earlier, is W.H. Smith's. Now, if you said to me 25 years ago, or even 10 years, or even 5 years ago, that W.H. Smith would be the biggest book chain, they sell chocolate and magazines for crying out loud. They are the biggest book chain now. They are the most influential book chain. So you have to weigh up, when you write, you have to weigh up. This is why we push this commercial side. It's not because we're just about making money, it's about if you want your book read, you've got to understand the dynamics of how this works. And that's not necessarily in the content, because I'm a great believer in, if you try and write to a particular genre or style, it won't work. If you think, I'm just going to copy Peter Jones.
So many cynical people that have come
try to do that, and it doesn't really work. It can work on Amazon on Kindle for a short while, but then you get found out. So I'm a great believer in a book, you will find an audience. It's finding the audience that matters. You've got to trust in the book, keep the book yours, but help find an audience. I think the difference is as well, if you are precious about your work, if you go to an agent at a particular time is going to be looking for particular themes. So an agent will have contacts with maybe 2 publishers. They'll have a friend there and a friend there. And they'll know exactly what they're looking for. And it literally will be, right, we're not doing wizards this year, we're doing twins. And one of them's got to be mad, and they've got to kill the other one. And that's our theme. Or, last year it was, it was relationships, it was Gone Girl. And then it was Girl on a Train. And every other book trying to be like those books. Now what's happening, which is good news for people like me and Darren, is that the big publishers are becoming more and more risk averse, so they won't take books from you guys. They just won't. Because they just want those nicely packaged, we want one that looks like that. Whereas we're saying, actually, you know what, there's a big audience out there who aren't going into bookshops, but we can reach over here this way. Because we've been to Barking Learning Centre, and they all come here to listen to you. And it might start with 20 people, who then tell 10 other people, who then show them the book. And instead of happening overnight, what happens now is it happens over a space of 6 months to a year. And a lot of my books sell better 18 months later than they do when I publish them. Because it's an ongoing process. Big publishers won't do that. Because if it's not working after 6 weeks, you don't hear from them anymore. And there are plenty of people who get a big deal who don't get their second book out because the first one hasn't worked.
That's an interesting point, because today we're talking about sticking with books and the way small publishers will stick with books. I invested a couple £100 in a promotion for a book that we published in 2011. So we don't give up on them, we just keep on going, we find new ways of doing things. When Mark Edwards launched himself, Amazon was a totally different marketplace as well, and that's something else that you have to realise, that you're not going to hear as many overnight millionaire successes on Amazon as you used to. Amazon have changed their algorithm since everything's based on an algorithm with stores. Metadata and algorithms, you should have paid more attention at school.
Online now, but they don't understand the basics of, balanced cards or something. I would have then looked at that and thought, well, there's someone who actually knows their market and their audience, and the audience might not be 7.5 million, but actually I only need this audience to be 7,500, and we're going to make lots of money. So it's being realistic, but at the same time showing that you're very aware of who you want to read your book. Because otherwise, what's the point of writing it if no one's going to read it?
The second important thing, I think, to attach with the whole package is a 2-page synopsis. And the funny thing about that as well is I have authors send me a 2-page synopsis, and I say, this 2-page synopsis is rubbish. You're telling me nothing. I want to know the twists, I want to know the turns, I want to know the end. And why do I want to know those? Not because I'm too lazy to read the book. It's because I want to know that you can actually think a linear plot line out. That you can actually show me where the twists and turns are, you can show me the ending. And you have to do that concisely in 2 pages, because, to be frank, we're getting 50 a week. I probably get about 10, probably a lot less. But, still a lot to go through. I can't sit there and read through 10 manuscripts every week. I wouldn't have time to do anything else. I'd just constantly be sitting there reading, nothing would get done. We've got other things to do. So we need that concise synopsis. 2 pages, tell us everything. You're not spoiling it for us. You're selling it to us. So that's really, really important.
Do you actually want the whole manuscript or just the first 2-3 chapters?
No, we would ask for the first 3 chapters or 50 pages.
Yeah. I always come back and ask for the full manuscript, but everyone works in a different way. Most agents will have very specific guidelines on what they want. But most of the agents I know, what they really want to see is your first page. And they will make a decision on that first page. Personally, I think that's stupid, because I've got plenty of very good books that have sold very well, where the first page bears no relation to the rest of the script. They'll say, I've got to be gripped in the first page, but actually, I think you're missing out on some very, very good books if you...
I would argue that.
Yeah, if you use that first page. If you use that as a criteria, you can miss out on some great projects. I think the other thing is that enthusiasm when you send something off, try and curb it a little bit once you've sent it off. I often get 4 or 5 emails within the next 2 days saying, have you read my book? Have you read my book? Have you read my book? And you have to politely say, I'm running a business, I've got 150 authors. I'm sure it's very good, and I will get back to you. And some people get very upset about that and very angry.
Doesn't that make the delete button really tempting?
Well, this is the problem. You know, again, think about the 5,000 books you're up against. You've got to play quite a careful game here. You know, you've got to be quite brave, but you've got to hold your nerve. You know, there's all sorts of things going on. I think the other thing is as well is be prepared for rejection. Because if an agent's looking for a particular theme, it's nothing to do with the quality of your work. It's just that they're not looking for a romance book. But it's a rejection nonetheless. I tend to be quite nice. I tend to write quite long. If I reject something, I tend to try and give advice. But most people just send a standard letter. The reason I do that is because I've had a number of people I've rejected who then badmouth my authors. Because Amazon has made the world a very open place. So you suddenly see 1-star reviews on a 5-star title. And it's often people who've had their book rejected.
I do the same. I will always tell them the reason why I've rejected it, and I always say to them it's a personal choice. Because for me it is. If I don't like it, it's just because I don't like it. It might be a very good book, but it just doesn't sit with me. It doesn't mean to say it's not going to sit with Matthew or another publisher. And that's what I tell them, and I try to point them in the direction of other places where they can go. Because I think that, you know, handling rejection, no one likes it. If you get dumped, you get dumped. It's a hard thing. You have to take it on the chin, dust yourself off and get up again and start again, really.
So you get through that first stage and someone loves your work and loves you and wants to invest in you. And that's when the fun really begins, because the first thing that I do, and you know, you might have a different way of doing this, but as soon as that contract's signed, I want a cover and a blurb, because I'm immediately going to tell the world that the book's coming. Darren and I are working a year ahead on our books, maybe more.
I'm already looking at 2018
in
terms of reading, but the 2017 is done and dusted.
Yeah, so it's already sorted.
And that's because the buyers are also working they're on February at the moment.
Yeah, I've just sent my March books off, which is, you know, it's a nightmare. I'm trying to sell the books for September and October, and I'm actually selling books for March. But it's worth you bearing that in mind, because the publisher's going to immediately engage with you. And so you're going to get five minutes of euphoria, and then they're going to ask you to work. And that's when it all really kicks off. And that's when it kicks off about building your profile, and not just the profile of the book. So that's the time then to think. The best thing with my authors is they panic, because the first thing I ask for is a photograph. And it's amazing what you get. Amazing what you get. Because you get those who immediately go, all right, there you go. Yeah, okay, I can't really put that on the press release or on the back of the book. And then you get others. I've got an author at the moment. I've been waiting 6 weeks for a photo. She's like, no, I haven't got anything good enough. It doesn't look right. And she's having a professional photographer. God almighty, just, you know. But it's important, you see, because people want to know who you are now. You have to put yourself out there a bit. Most of them are on Twitter anyway. And if you're not willing to do that, you know, you have to think very carefully about how you're then going to be presented. The other thing that we work on is, you know, I get scripts, I probably get them 9 months before publication to work on. And I should finish them 6 months before publication, but sometimes it's 3 months before publication because of the work involved. But essentially, you're going to end up with your finished book at least 3 months before publication. And that can be quite scary, because, again, you just want to get it out there. And someone's saying to you, well, here's the finished book, but we're not going to do anything with it, because we're just trying to build a buzz and some excitement and everything else. So you've got that horrible waiting moment. Should we talk about books in bookshops? Should we talk about Smiths?
Yeah.
Should we scare a few?
I think we scared enough already.
Who's heard of the, should we talk about Richard and Judy?
Yeah.
Who's heard of the Richard and Judy?
Richard and Judy, yeah. And how many people here actually think Richard and Judy sit in bed together like Eric and Ernie reading those every night?
I was absolutely convinced at first. I genuinely thought, you know, that Richard maybe would be there and he'd be like, look, not tonight. This book is so compelling and gripping. I just can't even think about that. I've got to finish it. Sadly, it doesn't work that way. So WH Smith, they have 3 Richard and Judy book clubs a year, and you, as a publisher, you apply, so you send off your book, and they give a date. So they'll say, right, we need the book now, but we're going to publish, the publication date will be December 2017 or whatever it will be. Right, so you have to have a finished book ready. If you get accepted, you then have to pay a marketing fee. How much do you think the marketing fee is?
A lot.
£25,000.
Oh,
goodness.
£25,000.
And you also have
That's
to
the
obviously...
publisher that's paying that, not the author.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh no, well, yeah, it's the publisher.
Because they did invite individuals to send their work in at one time.
Yeah, but they never took any of them on.
No.
It was just a... So 25 grand. Now, who knows about discounts? Right, so if you buy a book from Waterstones, how much do you think the publisher gets?
20%?
2/3.
20%?
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yeah. So I get about, my discount's about 50% at the moment. Right, so they keep half. So if the book's £8.99, they get £4.50.
WH Smith may ask for 60%.
W. Smith may ask for 75%.
Yeah. And also, the supermarkets will also ask for a higher percentage.
So how much does the author get?
Well,
This is the thing.
this is where the mathematics start getting really interesting.
This is where more and more people are turning to self-publishing, because if you think about it, say Tesco's, well, let's stick to Richard and Judy because we've opened the Pandora's box now. So Richard and Judy, right? I'm an independent publisher, and they say, you know what, we've selected your book. Richard was in bed last night, he loved it, right? We want it in the Richard and Judy book club, right? So we need the 25 grand up front, and we want 65% discount on retail. And we want to start with a print run. We're going to take an initial order of 25,000 copies, right? So I'm thinking, okay, so I've got to find 25 grand, then I've got to print 25,000, so that's another £30,000 roughly,
Yeah.
if I can get a good enough deal. Then deliver. It's not firm sale, so it goes on consignment. So what that means is well, no, it's not working, Matthew, so you can have them all back.
Sale or return.
Right? So, if you think about it, when you ask them, well, how many copies do these books sell? Well, you know, the Richard and Judy Book Club can sell 100,000. Yeah, that's book 1. What about book 12? Not really willing to talk about book 12. So book 12 might do 6, 10,000. Well, if I published a book and it sold 6 to 10,000, that would be fantastic. If I'd spent 25 grand marketing and 30,000 printing 20,000 copies, and I get 10,000 back, and they're only paying for 10,000 at 65%, you can start to see that it's not really working as a financial model. In fact, the house will be gone, and I'll be working at Tesco's. That's it, it's done. So what happens is the big publishers just dominate still, because how can an independent publisher afford to be involved? The last thing on that is they also have what they call a retrospective thank you. So every copy that sells, you give them an extra 50p. So essentially the discount works out at about 75%.
Yeah.
So you're right, if you're an author, now if you're an author with me, I start on 20%, most of my authors get 50%, right? 50%. So I have 50-50. When I was with Penguin, it was about 7.5 to 10 of net receipts. So if you're getting back £1.50 and you're then getting 10% of that, you've got to sell a hell of a lot of books to start making any money at all. So you can understand again why people like Mark Edwards are saying, well look, you might be offering me a 10 grand advance or a 50 grand advance, but I'm not going to get paid any royalties till I've earned that out. I can do that now.
I think that's an interesting thing about advances as well.
Built a building out of the free copies.
Most left behind in hotels.
Most left behind book ever, yeah.
In hotels,
Yeah.
especially. Yeah.
But it became a weird. It isn't actually reflective of publishing, because When Grey came out, the fourth one,
Which was a rewrite of the first
which was
one.
the rewrite of the
from
first one, but from a
perspective.
different viewpoint. I mean, the most crass piece of publishing you've ever seen in your life. The first week it came out, they had 300,000 pre-orders, right? 300,000. They went straight to number one. The second best-selling book that week was by Ian McEwan. How many copies do you think it sold?
4,000.
Close. 5,500 copies. And that was the second best-selling book. So when you hear these stories, they are stories. They don't reflect at all the industry. They are just weird anomalies.
Yeah, between the apex and the sort of mid-list, there's a whole there's a whole world of publishing surviving in there, you know, and down to the lower self-published grounds as well. There's a whole world in there, and there's people that are making a very good living out of it, from independent publishers, from self-publishing, and from being in the mid-list with a recognised one of the big 4 or 5 publishers in this country. So positively, yes, there is a lot of market. There's a lot of areas where you can make a living, and you can market and engage with your readers. And that's the important thing. Find out who your readers are. Find out who they are. Talk to them. And I don't just mean your family. You know, forget them. They're going to say it's wonderful.
But this is an important point, because every author I've ever worked with immediately says, because I always talk about collaboration and look, you've got to be engaged, and they say, don't worry, I've got 200 mates, and they're immediately going to, get onto Amazon and write me a 20-word review, because that's all you need, 20 words. They're going to write me a 20-word review. First day, we're going to have 50 reviews on there, and it's going to go nuts, right? 6 weeks later, there's 3 reviews on there, usually from people I've found, and you're like, so what happened to you? Because you've written a literary novel about, 2 women who fall in love even though they're married, and there's a breakup, and it's very tense, and then they move to Paris again. It's a very, your best friends read crime, and the other best friend likes Andy McNab. Why the bloody hell are they going to read your book? They're not your audience. They're your mates or your family. So that doesn't tend to work. The hardest thing people ever find to do, it seems to be the most onerous task in the world, is writing a review. Everywhere I go, I say to people, please, if you've enjoyed a book, please put a review up on Amazon, because it makes an enormous difference. And no one does. It's really, really hard to get people to do it.
I mean, we put links in books and stuff like that to make it easy for them, so they just have to click the link if they want, and they can be taken straight to the review page. We do all sorts of things like that just to make it easier for them. We ask them nicely. Sometimes we just play about with the wording and stuff, just to ask them a bit more directly. But it is one of those things. It's one of those things where someone's read a book and all they really want to do is they've really enjoyed it. And if it's a really good book, it lives with them for a little while. They're the people that might go on and write the review, but then maybe they could just go on to the next book straight away. Especially if it is on Kindle. Finish that one
I
book.
don't know if it's the same now, but when I used to read the Amazon reviews, I was still sceptical, and you could click on the person that reviewed it and see what else they've reviewed, and see if you get
do that.
Consistent.
But you see, the thing is, publishers, we love you for doing that, because if you go back to that 90%, all they see is the 5 stars, right? Why should they? Let's give you another example. There was a book published a couple of months ago. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I rejected it, and someone else published it, and the first week it had 1,500 5-star reviews. Now, I don't care if you're best friends with everyone in the world, you are not going to get 1,500 reviews in a week, right? So they've bought the reviews or whatever it is they've done to get those reviews up.
At which point Amazon should be investigating.
Should be investigating, but it's a bestseller, so they're not going to investigate too hard, because they're making 90p every time it sells. But your average reader, they're not going to think that anyone's going to do something as immoral as that, are they? They're just going to go, God, this is Amazon have put it at the top. It must be good. It's selling well. Look at all those 5-star reviews. Because again, they're not picking it off a shelf. They're just looking at a 1-inch JPEG and all those stars.
It's a questionable marketing practice, really.
Yeah.
As questionable as giving away 50,000 copies of the book to get word of mouth, but at least giving away 50,000 copies for word of mouth is a more honest way.
Is invested in that project.
But you can do small reviews on Amazon. You get sections of the book, and if they read that and it grabs their imagination, then...
Exactly.
It also works the other way. We had a book that was doing very nicely. It was selling quite a few hundred a day. It was doing quite well. And it was during the week when Amazon and Kobo pulled a load of books for incest and bestiality. Because somehow their checking mechanisms weren't checking for these two rather disgusting practices. And during that week, someone left a review on this book that was doing quite well, and it just said graphic sex.
And that was it, the book?
The book bombed overnight because it happened that week. It bombed because everyone thought, oh, it's something connected with that. Their sales more than halved on that book, and it's taken 2 years to actually get them back again. Do you know what? There's not one sex scene in that book. And I wrote to Amazon and I said to them, this is a person that hasn't reviewed this. Fortunately, since then, lots of other people have come back and said, I don't know what that person was, on about, but there's no graphic sex in this book. They sounded a bit disappointed, actually. But, it just shows the effect that a review can have, good and bad. And good reviews, if you read a book and you enjoy a book, leave a review, I think, because publishers and authors just love that.
Yeah, I can't tell you how.
As authors, you want that yourself.
I think I would urge all writers to do it, because you are supporting fellow writers. It might seem a very trivial thing to do, but it genuinely makes a massive difference. If I have a book that goes over 50 reviews, Amazon will start to promote that book far more vigorously than they did before.
Do you have to do 55-star reviews or just 50 reviews?
No, just 50 reviews.
That's the goal that all publishers really have. Try and get 50 reviews as quickly as possible, but to make sure that they're genuine reviews. I mean, we, through our newsletter, we will give out books for review to our newsletter readers, but we ask them to say that they've received it free and it's for an unbiased review, and that can write they hate it. If they really do hate it, I'd rather they was honest and we knew why they hated it, in all honesty.
But I think this is why self-published authors, the entrepreneurial ones, the ones who are really engaged, can become successes, because as traditional publishers, if I want a review in The Guardian or The Telegraph or The Times, right, I have to send them a physical book. They won't accept ebooks. Okay, so I've immediately got to spend money, and then I've got to post it, and then it's on a table with however many thousand books have come out that week, and I'm a small publisher, and it's probably a daily author. If you're sending out, you've got a good email list, and you've built up a lot of connections on Twitter, and you know the 25 best bloggers, and you send them all a free ebook, well, they've all got 1,000 followers. You only need 10% of each of those 1,000 to buy that book, and you'll be in the top 50 on Amazon. It sounds ridiculous. Why are we not all doing it? Well, we are all trying to do it, and this is what's happening. So even those bloggers now, the people who do it for fun, are getting sent huge rafts of material from big publishers, because they're having far more influence over sales than a review in the Guardian newspaper.
So again, they're muddying the water for us, where we were actually doing quite well with those.
But there'll come a point where, at least I think, what you're doing will be a niche of its own, and it will survive.
I totally agree. In fact, my whole business strategy is based on it, because what's happening is, in 2.5 years, my audience has probably is grown tenfold, but they're at the point now where they're actually buying the books. So before they were engaging with the authors and the publisher, and they were buying maybe one book, and now they're looking, and instead of saying, well, what's that author got coming next, they're saying, well, what's that publisher got coming next? And the other authors are engaged in that process, so they're all reviewing each other's books. And it's starting to work, but it takes a long time.
And we will reach a tipping point, a saturation point with self-published authors, because they're going to be doing it and doing it and doing it and getting disparaged and despondent through the fact that maybe they're putting all this hard work in and they're getting maybe 4 or 5 sales in a year.
Well, it's a bit like ebooks. You know, we constantly heard print is dead. Print is dead. How many times I heard print is dead? And all the time I was hearing print is dead, I was printing books, which was a bit worrying, because print is dead. Print is over 80% of my revenue. Ebooks has never been more than 20. In all the companies I've worked for, and I started before ebooks, I was one of the first editors to put something on a CD in the UK, and we charged £350 for it, which shows how things have changed. Ebooks have never been more than 20% of the market. Never more than 20% of the market. And you know, the book sales have gone up again over the last year. So I'm hoping that will bring a few bookshops back, but independent bookshops. Ones that want to try new authors, ones who think about the audience that they're dealing with. That's the big difference. Wolfstones, I deal with one buyer, and he makes a decision across 250 stores. How can he decide what works in Blackburn compared to Exeter? Whereas what Wolfstones used to do was you'd have a manager who saw 30 reps a month with a budget. So if you were in Barking, you would be buying in, you know, you'd get your West Ham book in, but you wouldn't get, you know, you wouldn't be getting Man U books in. But what happens now? Well, there's a true story. There was a history of Blackburn Football Club, right? W.H. Smith's in Ipswich got 300 copies, and W.H. Smith's in Blackburn got 2. Because someone in the warehouse just went, well, this is how the algorithm works, and out it goes. And the publisher just got all of them back because they didn't sell. Well, of course they didn't sell. They were in Ipswich. Everyone in Ipswich going, what the bloody hell is that? Just ridiculous. So, you know, there's a very interesting dynamic. And this is where, again, this is why publishers like us are saying to authors right from the very start, you've got to be
we got some nice reviews, and to be honest, the reviews didn't really do a ton for sales. I've got to say that honestly. But then we had a PR piece on a couple who we write with, and their sales went ballistic because people read the article and they were interested in what they were doing. And even though there wasn't a huge sell for the book, the PR piece just had a little picture of the book on there. People went out and bought it. Then they bought the second, the third, the fourth.
I mean, I publish. Who watches Poirot? Okay, well, I publish Captain Hastings. Right? So Hugh Fraser, the actor, I publish his thrillers. And I have no problem getting him PR. No one cares about his books. They couldn't care less about his books. They just want to know about working with David Suchet and what was it like on Sharp and, you know, how about your costume and that's all they care about. But his books get mentioned every single time. And so it's just amazing publicity. But going back to the reviews, I had one author where I got him a double-page spread in the Sunday Times, and I'm not joking, I literally got the big cigar out, put my feet back and said, right, that's it, the company's made, I'm off. You know, next week it's going to go mad. 2-page, full colour, author, blah, blah, blah. 3 copies I sold the next week. 3! And that's in the Sunday Times. And I just suddenly realised it was a wake-up call because I was selling more copies, if this book was about restaurants, I was selling more copies through restaurants where they were pushing them at customers than the Sunday Times review could have ever got me. So it's thinking about that audience and where a book's going to go.
It's that horrible advertising saying fish where the fish are. It's a horrible saying. I hate that advertising speak, but there's a lot of truth in that. Why fish where there's no fish?
You've gone
Find
out.
your audience, know your audience. Talk to your audience.
Yeah.
So now we've terrified everybody into actually, they're not going to write another word. I mean, is there any questions you want to ask while we're here? Because obviously we've barely scratched the surface and we've just talked at you, but you know, we're both available to get emails and everything else. But if you've got any questions now, then go for it.
I'm submitting to agents at the moment. I've had 1 full requests and quite a lot of rejections.
Yeah.
But some of them, they've been very complimentary about my writing. And one of them said she loved the pages, she was hooked until the vampire came in. So, what is your opinion of publishing with vampires at the moment? Because I think that I may have to change it to something else.
I'm going to give you a story about vampires. I probably get werewolf vampires, werewolves with vampires, werewolves eating vampires, vampires having sex with werewolves. I probably get, yeah, zombies not so much now,
Oh,
but I probably get a fifth of everything I receive is around those genres. Now, what I would say is, if you're going after an agent or a traditional publisher, they're just going to reject you, because they'll assume that that's done, right? At least for 2 years, and then it will come back again. But at the moment it's done, there's nothing there. But if you're self-publishing, I'm going to give you a very good example. I received a proposal from someone who connected with me on Twitter, and she said, oh, you know, could you read my book? And I said, look, you know, yeah, of course I will. So she sent it through. It is the worst, I'm not joking, it is the worst book I've ever read. And I've published some shit. And I've read some really bad stuff. But this was, I just could not cope with it. It was almost written like some weird stream of consciousness shopping list. It was like, the vampire jumped out and then he ate him and then he bit him and then he bit him on the leg and then he ran out there. And I thought, what the bloody hell's... And it was a vampire and werewolf book. And I tell you what, I've never spent so long trying to work out how to reject something, because she believed in this project wholeheartedly, and I just thought, I can't, you know, I just don't know how to reject it, because it was just, no amount of work could have saved it. So I thought, what I'm going to do, she'd self-published on Kindle, I'm going to go and have a look on Amazon. And she had 75 reviews, and nearly all of them were 5-star, okay? And I'm not joking, she was really smart, she knew her audience. Because the main character was based on a lead singer of a rock band that all these women followed. So they all, you know, fancied this lead singer. He was the main character. They couldn't care less how badly it was written. Basically, they were all living the fantasy through her book. She knew her audience, she nailed it. She was a better publisher than I was, because I was just going to do, I looked at the quality and I just went, no. She commercially should stick to what she had, because actually she'd got it right. If she'd gone to a publisher, they would have destroyed that book. What she'd done, okay, for quality aside, she knew her audience and she just went after it, and she got it right. So what I would say to you is, you've got to choose, look, do I remain precious and true to my project? And if I do, this is the way I've got to do it, but I've got to get behind it 100% myself. And let's be honest, there's a huge audience out there for this stuff. And you know, you just type in vampires on Kindle and you see what you're up against.
Yeah.
Right? But I would suggest to you that if you want the deal, change it. And I don't often tell authors to change. If you put all that effort in, you do want people to read it, and if you want people to read it, they've got to buy it. And people are very choosy with their cash these days. You know, when they've got endless choices at 99p on Amazon, you've got to work really bloody hard to make your book stand out.
It's amazing how many readers as well on Amazon are just going to go for the free books.
Yeah.
Some of those are just absolutely shocking. Again, this is part of the saturation on the market, and that's the thing that makes your job so much more difficult. Because many authors have done their book, and they feel, I want as many people as possible to read this, so I'll just push that out there free. Well, that does a couple of things to the market. I mean, if you've got 7 or 8 books, yes, you can put the first one out there free, and then you've got a series of books that you can engage people in and you can catch people in. That's the one that you cast out there and you hook people in. But if you've got just this is your one and only book, then it's not really the time to give that away free after all of that hard work.
So I think when you've actually finished, and you've got that script in front of you, that's the time, you know, you want to rush ahead and you want to get that out in the world, but that's the time to actually take a step back and think very carefully about what you want to achieve with that book. Because if you do see yourself as a best-selling author, and you see it as, you know, even as a career, you know, you want to be a best-selling author, then I would always suggest you spend the first 6 months trying to find an agent. Because that traditional route is still, there's no guarantees, but if you've got someone like that in your corner, because what an agent wants to do is they want to make money out of you. So if you've got something that they can sell, you've got a massive advantage. If you think, well, actually, you know, I'm not going to be J.K. Rowling. You know, this is quite an intimate book. It's something that was really for me, but I'd quite like to get it out there. There are some really good self-publishing options available now. But you're right, the emphasis is on you to do the work. And I have to be honest, there's quite a few sort of shyster companies out there who will quite happily take thousands of pounds from you to do a spell check and stick it in a PDF. So you've got to be very, very wary. But there are a number of very, very positive options available. And then there are people like Darren and myself who sit somewhere in the middle. Because for us it's very personal. It's our company. We usually have a relationship with the authors because we haven't got thousands of them. We haven't got shareholders. We haven't got huge profit margins. So we tend to engage with authors one-to-one, and we need every single book to work.
So I think that's an important point that
yeah.
we do engage one-to-one, because I myself have looked at great manuscripts and talked to authors and found that I couldn't actually work with the authors. So that personal element, even though the manuscripts are great and you think those books, you know, they could find an audience, but if I can't work with the author, and if the author isn't as engaged in the what is the commercial aspect of trying to sell product? And no author wants to think of their book as product, but what it is product, that is product. And you have to get your head around that. It's not work of art. Once it's done like that, and it's ready to go to consumers, that's product. And you've got to represent that because your name's on the cover of that. So that element is very, very important. And I've found in the past that one or two authors, not that many, but one or two, I simply have gone back to them and said, I love your book, but because of the dialogue we've been having over a period of months, which is important to try and build up that relationship, I've found that I simply can't work with you. And it might be a clash of personalities. I'm not the most likeable person in the world, probably. I might be on the other hand, though. But it is a clash of personalities sometimes. So you have to have that dialogue in a smaller company relationship. But I think you also need it in a larger publisher as well. You'll find it might be a bigger team behind you if you go to a larger publisher, but you will still be having one-to-one relationships to some degree. And you've got to sell yourself. You've got to, that point, you've got to, as I say, step up and sell yourself.
I was speaking to a group of writers earlier this week at the author school, and you get a real mix of reactions to that commercial aspect, because you are talking about something artistic and something very personal. And one of them said to me, well, Kafka would never have stood in front of people. And I said, well, now Kafka wouldn't have sold any bloody books. Can you imagine pitching a book about a cockroach and a trial? No, it's just not going to work. What we would do is, well, there's a thriller element here, you know, but I'll be a bit facetious, but you've got to sort of park that. It's still your book, and it still matters, but you've got to find someone else that it matters to as well. And then what you've got to do is you've got to find hundreds and then thousands of people it matters to, because they're the ones who are going to make you a successful author. They couldn't care less how long it took you to write. What they care about is that you're engaging with them on some level. And we're not talking here just about Twitter and Facebook. It's genuinely about, you know, selling your book and telling people why it matters. And I don't care whether it's an easy-to-read romance or some sort of complex magical realism. You've still got to find an audience and engage with them. And I think the big difference now is, you know, we were talking about 25 years ago. What sold a book was the quality of the book. So you put a book out there, and the Guardian and the Telegraph and the Times would review it, and then on Monday, the people who read those papers would go into their Waterstones and they would buy it. And actually, they knew nothing about the author. They might have read a previous book, but really they're going on recommendations. Well, now, the book's almost secondary, because the thing that people engage with is the author. So you think of an author like Peter James. Who knows Peter James? Who's heard of Peter James? So Peter James is now officially the biggest selling crime author in the world. So when he publishes a new book, he sells 13 million copies straight away. But he still does a 6-month book tour with every single book. So he goes to libraries, goes to bookshops. He doesn't need to, really, because he's in that wonderful position where he can publish anything and some people are going to buy it.
He's got a following.
But he's got a following, and he keeps engaged with that following to make sure that they keep turning up and they keep his books ticking over. Now, when you're a debut author, that's hard to do because no one knows who you are, so you really are starting from scratch.
Peter James is a good point, though. I spoke to Peter a few months back, and he said to me, it took me 22 years to become an overnight success.
Actors do that as well.
Yes.
He was writing horror books back in the 90s.
Well, his first book was, what, 82?
Yeah.
And the first Roy Grace, which is the Roy Grace novels, was 1997.
And he was writing horror as a genre first off, and he was trying to compete with the big horror writers at the time, such as the James Herberts and Sean Hudsons of the world, who were quite large in those times. So he was trying to compete in that field. And his agent said to him, "You're not doing it." And he wasn't actually pleased with what he was doing anyway. So he thought, well, what can I do? How can I reposition myself? How can I put myself ahead of the pack? And he chose crime fiction at a time when crime fiction wasn't overly sexy. But he actually got in at a very good time, because at the same time, people like James Patterson were starting to make waves, and he kind of was not just riding that crest of a wave, but he was on
He was the first of the Brit crime writers, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But he's in a difficult position now. I mean, this is the flip side of success. Every book he writes has to have "dead" in the title. This is true. This is true.
What's his name again?
Peter James.
Peter James. So you think he's on book 20 now? What the hell do you do? He writes one. He has to write one out every 18 months. It has to be set in Brighton. It has to star Roy Grace. Roy Grace is getting older. You know, you get to this point where you think, God, do I really have it? It's like Lee Child. You know, how many more novels can we have like that? You know, Rebus was killed off and then brought back to life. So this is actually the idea of the difference between a writer and an author. When you become an author, and when you become a successful author, you've got to be prepared as well that people see you a particular way. Because if you start making money for people in particular, they're not going to want you to change. It's interesting, Peter James had a ghost story out last year, and he had to blackmail his publishers into doing it. Because they said, no, we're not going to do that, you're a crime writer. He said, oh, you won't get the next Roy Grace if I don't have this book out. Now, unfortunately, because he makes them so much money, they immediately did it, and of course sold thousands of copies anyway, because it's him. But he started with nothing. And it really was events like this where he goes and talks to people. And I think this is the key point, it's word of mouth, isn't it? I mean, how do you... sorry,
I was just going to ask when they changed their genre. Don't they usually have a pseudonym and write under another name?
Well, the thing is,
Some will.
the problem now is that you then have to create all that work around that pseudonym as well.
Look what happens to J.K. Rowling with Robert Galbraith. That sold 400 copies on release. It got some very poor reviews. Then suddenly it was whispered, oh, hang on a minute, this was J.K. Rowling. Suddenly it sold 400,000 copies and it was getting brilliant reviews.
Yeah, and now we've had four novels.
As Robert Galbraith, if she hadn't, or if her secretary or someone hadn't blabbed, she'd still be writing there selling 400 copies. So choosing a different pseudonym is fine, but unless you've got a way to market that, you know, even if you're in that privileged position, which she is, it can still fall completely on its arse, unfortunately.
It's quite nice to have that as a backup, though, that you're already a best-selling author. You
And
accidentally review a author. So yeah, I mean, all my authors now go under the pseudonym J.K. Rowling, and we're going to reveal that they're not J.K. Rowling when it starts to say. If you look on Amazon, there are about 4 Stephen Kings. I mean, it's outrageous, really. And, you know, you think, most people, they get their mobile out now, and they flick through, and they're like, well, I'm a Stephen King fan. Oh, there's a Stephen King, I haven't heard of that one. Download it. Because you're not in a bookshop anymore. You're not picking a book off the shelf and browsing and looking and reading, and immediately going, that's clearly not the Stephen King I know. You're seeing 5-star reviews that could have come from anyone, and it's 99p, and you're just pressing a button. And this is what writers and publishers are up against now. This sort of almost impulse purchase, which is great if word of mouth is good and you respond to something, but for browsing it can be, you know, a nightmare. How do you buy your books? How do you choose what book you're going to read next? And I'm not talking about we've all got our favourites and our guilty pleasures, which we wait for the next one.
The first question should be is how many people read? I know you're all right, but how many people here actually read?
Yeah, good for you.
Thank God for that, because I've had authors come to me and say, oh, well, I've written this manuscript. I say, well, you know, what do you read? Who do you like? Oh, I don't read.
Yeah.
And there was a guy at London Book Fair this year. He doorstepped a seminar that was going on, and he started by posing to ask a question, but really all he was trying to do was draw attention to his book. And he said to the woman who was holding the seminar, who was a very well-known self-published author called Joanna Penn.
Right.
And he said, oh, I've got a self-published book, I don't read, and this is fantastic, this book, everyone should read it. And, you know, you've got to think, well, what does that guy know? Where's his experience? Where's his writing come from? Or is it just truly gifted? I don't think it was truly gifted in all honesty. So, you know, reading is as essential as writing, and it's something, it's that muscle, and it's a memory muscle. You have to keep using it all the time. So the more you read, the more you listen to things.
But there's also that, back to that commercial aspect, it gives you a sense of what's out there, because if you're going to throw yourself in that market, writers tend to write in the areas that they read. It's not
just keep on going, we find new ways of doing things. When Mark Edwards launched himself, Amazon was a totally different marketplace as well, and that's something else that you have to realise, that you're not going to hear as many overnight millionaire successes on Amazon as you used to. Amazon have changed their algorithms since. Everything's based on an algorithm with stores. Metadata and algorithms. You should have paid more attention at school. I should have. When Mark Edwards started, basically, he was able to tap into a hungry audience, and the way the Amazon algorithm worked in those days was that the more people that bought the books, the higher your book would go, and it would stay there, just like what we would call a normal chart, except we'll tell you things about the normal chart as well later that will curl your hair.
Yeah.
But what's happened subsequently is now Amazon work on an algorithm that's a 30-day chart. So you could have pre-orders, say 1,000, 2,000, your book would launch really high, it would sit there, it would get triple sales, continue, but after 30 days, it could just drop straight out, because they've changed the way the algorithm is. And that means that people like Mark Edwards, if they were starting today, probably couldn't get the traction that they actually got, and they would have to find, and he was intelligent enough probably anyway, to find a different way to make his book successful. But Amazon are constantly tweaking and changing things. And talking about drawing a comparison with maybe the way that a large publisher would deal with a mid-list author, because you've got your J.K. Rowling's at the top, your Peter James, and all of those people. But then when you get into mid-list, you might have been at that top at some stage, but maybe a couple of books misfired, and suddenly you find yourself as a mid-list author. I've been speaking to a number of publishers over the past year, and trying to gauge from them what their marketing budgets are for mid-list authors. HarperCollins.
£250?
It's £315. That's their entire marketing budget for a book. £315. Today I spent £200 on a 5-year-old book, and I will continue to spend on those authors because I believe in them, and those books because I believe in them. It doesn't mean that I've got potless ends of cash flowing through me, I haven't. But the thing is to try and revitalise the book, build on a platform that the author's also engaged in and built for himself.
And that's what the market's done, because when you could only buy books in bookshops, you could only see what the bookshop was showing you. So when they changed their stock, you had to change the books that you wanted to buy. But that's not the case anymore, because none of the books ever disappear. So, I mean, carrying on from Darren's example, I've got a crime novel that it was one of the first ones I published with Urbane, and I tried everything, I couldn't sell anything. I sold about 300 copies. And in the last 3 months, it's 2 years old, I've sold 3,000 ebooks. Now the interesting thing is, I couldn't tell you why. I should say, what I did was, because I was so clever, I did this and this, and it went stratospheric. I can't tell you why. It's just that the audience, after 2 years of constantly pushing it, discovered it. And a few people who make decisions and influence others clearly said, you should read this.
Somewhere, you somehow touched
the
blue touch paper.
And it's and then it doesn't move. It stays there. Now the interesting thing about Amazon, and this is where, you know, Amazon is the bane of our lives, but we have to engage with it because it is our largest market. Authors become absolutely obsessed with those rankings. Absolutely obsessed. But what's interesting about it is that they'll ring you up and they'll go, I was 1,300,000 last night, and this morning I'm 6,000, and how many thousands of copies have I sold? And I said, you sold 3. Because in the 0.6 seconds that 3 people ordered your book, no one else ordered another book in that genre, so you flew up the rankings. And tomorrow, you'll be back down to 800,000. Unless another 3 people buy it straight away. And that's when a book works on Amazon. Because if another 3 buy it, and another 3 buy it, and another, then it will stay. And it is a computer system. The computer picks up on it and it keeps it there. And then it appears in emails. And then it appears at the top when you do a search. Because most people, when they search on Amazon, they don't search for Peter James and put in the title. They just search for crime thrillers. And you get 1.2 million books popping up. So what do? They just look at the first 10. So everyone's working to try and get into that first page, because most people, the 90%, are just impulse purchasing those books.
Can I just ask Darren, that 315, does that apply to all HarperCollins imprints? In particular,
that is an average mid-list fee that they've told.
But that's for fiction. It's not.
If you've got a moment afterwards, I'll explain why. But it's actually about Myra that is a HarperCollins imprint.
Well, that was just a fixed a figure that they told me. That's what they spend. And they said for a big book, they were saying around £14,000. But then again, you know yourself, things like Girl on a Train, books like that, they've had literally thousands of pounds put into them. Some of them are just huge marketing exercises, and it doesn't really matter how good or bad the book is.
Well, can I talk about Gone Girl? Because I think that's a good example, and you might find this interesting. Who's read Gone Girl?
I didn't know.
Okay. Why did you buy it?
I didn't actually buy it. I was given to it by a friend.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good enough. Okay. We hate people who give books to other people because obviously that's our business, but that's fine. Gone Girl. I mean, if you haven't read it, you must have seen it, right? Okay. So I went to a talk, and it was a talk on marketing books, right? So I thought, this would be interesting. And they had 3 people. They had a self-published author, they had Mark Edwards, and they had an independent publisher, and they had the head of marketing of the publisher who published marketing. You have never seen such a smug man in your entire life. Okay, so the other 2 talked first, and then he said, "Well, I'm going to talk about the massive success that is Gone Girl, and I'm going to tell you how we turned that into a massive success." And he literally said, "What we did was we did the posters on buses, and we did, they did give away ice cream in Trafalgar Square. I'm not joking. And we did, and we spent X million pounds." And I said, "Look, that's not marketing. You didn't market the book. You promoted it once it was actually selling. So what you did is someone smart at your company saw that book was starting to sell better than the others and went, quick, throw out a budget at it, this could be huge." And then you sold the film rights, and then it went even bigger. How did you market that book in the first place? What were the things you did to make that book stand out and become a bestseller? Nothing. No different to all the other books. That's an author who doesn't do interviews, isn't on social media. It was her 3rd book of a 3-book deal. The other 2 bombed. Because when I said to him, "Well, how do the other 2 books sell?" He said, "They sell very well." Of course they do. They sell very well now, and now you've repackaged them and they look exactly like the one that's a bestseller. But they bomb. I mean, we're talking hundreds of copies. And he did. The important thing here is he didn't know. Because they had 100 books published that month, and that was the one that worked. But it worked because readers made it work. They decided that it was going to be a bestseller.
Prime comparison to that is the way the films worked as well with Gone Girl. Gone Girl, directed by David Fincher, it was as good a film as you could make out of, I thought, a mediocre book, with a very terrible ending. But it had a huge marketing push behind it. thousands of people saw it, hundreds of thousands, millions of people saw it. The film that followed that up was the earlier one called Dark Places with Charlize Theron. It earned £75 in the opening weekend. No, not 75 million or 1,000, £75 in the opening weekend. This is after Gone Girl. You'd think people think, oh, I must go and see that next one by Gillian Flynn. No one cared.
It's because the 90% have moved on. They found something else. The 10% who actually spent 75 quid was still there.
Ironically, it was a better film.
Yeah. But the others have gone because it was a bit of a flash in the pan. Now, if the publisher had been smart, they would have had the other book, the next book, lined up. She hasn't got a next book. Because they'd already said, well, we're not really keen on that, you know. They'd burnt their bridges. And then it became a success. And this is the difference, I think, between the big publishers who are desperate to try and have those one or two huge hits that keep them turning over and keep the shareholders happy, and the publishers who are trying to actually build a relationship with an author that is actually not about one book, it's about 4 books. Because most authors make it around the 3rd or 4th book now. And of course when you do, all those other books you've written fly off the shelves. So publishers like Darren and myself are looking not just for the authors who come in with the one great book they've written, we're looking for the authors who've got the one great book and already thinking about 2 and 3. And preferably have got number 2 sorted and done. Because if we want to invest in you, we want to invest in the next one and the next one, because it will sell more and more and more and more. And that definitely works. The authors that I'm working with now are getting onto the 2nd and 3rd books. We're selling more of the first books every single time. And you create franchises, essentially. But you're also creating that audience that comes along with you. So going back to, we've waffled on, going back to that original question, if you finish your book now and you decide you want to write to an agent or a publisher, what are you going to put together in that package that you send to them? What do you think should go in it? What do you think you should put with your email or your letter?
With a smaller publisher, that always helps.
Yeah, no, we're at least 100 quid, at least 100 quid, and maybe a beer.
I think Matthew actually said it right earlier. You think of it as though you're approaching a future employer. It's almost like you go to them with a CV. Your introductory letter must be your CV, your opening gambit. And that's the thing that is as important to draft and to type correctly and have no typos in it as your manuscript. You know, because if it's just rushed and it looks like it's been, you know, written by someone hanging off the edge of a bus while they're on the way to work, it's not going to impress anyone.
And we know why it happens, because it's just that thing of, I've done it and I've got to get it out there. And so they don't, you know, you always get the round robin email where you know, it's even got someone else's name on it because they haven't gone back in, you know, and you're all on a blind copied on an email.
They're not even blind copies.
Yeah, it's just going to be rejected. It's just going to be rejected every time, because the truth is we can pick and choose. We can pick and choose, and we're small publishers. But we're still investing our money in someone, so, you know.
Time.
Yeah. But at the same time, you know, we mentioned earlier about thinking commercially about your project. Don't go over the top. I had because I also do business books, and I had someone who sent me a book on finance. And in the target audience, size of the audience, they put 7.5 million people. The audience is 7.5 million people because they've all got a bank account. And therefore they're all going to be interested in my finance book. Yeah, okay. It's not going to happen, is it? Let's be honest. You're just wasting someone's time. If someone said to me, you know what, there are 20,000 students doing accountancy every year, but 10,000 of them don't have any numerical background, or everyone's doing their banking online now, but they don't understand the basics of, you know, balanced card laws. I would have then looked at that and thought, well, there's someone who actually knows their market and their audience, and the audience might not be 7.5 million, but actually, I only need this audience to be 7,500, and we're going to make lots of money. Sorry. So
not that it's not interesting.
but this is the other thing. The average advance is about £1,000. So the thing is that you hear the stories of the, you know, £750,000 but it literally is the 1 in a million, maybe the 1 in the 10 million. And again, it's not said to make this all negative and why the hell do I bother to write? It's just no point. It's just depressed the hell out of me. It's just to make you realise what you're getting into. Because there's so much, you're doing. So if you get one of us to even respond to your email, you are already streets ahead of everybody else. So when you get to that point where you're writing to people, you should take every single response as a triumph, because it means that someone's actually bothered to read your material and responding to it, and you should take heart from that. The other big issue is with the self-publishing. What happens is that people get 5 or 6 rejections, and they immediately then go and self-publish, because they're so depressed, or they're just so fed up, or they're so cross, that they just think, sod it, I'm just going to do it. And what tends to happen is that 99% of them then come to Darren and myself 6 months later and say, I self-published my book, and it did okay, but could you now turn me into a success? Well, no, because you've destroyed the market by putting it out there already. If we then try and sell it into Wallstones, they're like, it's a self-published book. Don't care what cover you put on it, it doesn't work. So that's why I said take that step back at the start and think about what you want to achieve and take the time it takes to get the deal that you want. Don't get overexcited and jump at the first thing that happens, and certainly don't give 10 grand to a self-publishing company to do a spell check for you. Don't do print on demand with someone. Think carefully about what you want to achieve, because all the choices are out there, but you've got to take the time to get that choice right.
Again, just do your research. If you're researching as part of your writing background, just do your research. Go and get the Writers and Artists Yearbook. It's the A to Z of publishers, basically. And it will tell you who you can contact in there, so your telephone number, you pick it up. Even if you get the receptionist, you can ask, is that person still there for a start? Because they may have moved on between that being published and when you're going to send your email or your letter to them. Nothing worse than a letter going somewhere or an email and there's someone else sitting in that chair and they think, oh, this person obviously hasn't done their research. Pick up the phone, find out if they're still there. Are they accepting submissions? It's a simple thing. People, you're in the land of communication. That's what you guys are all doing. If you're writing a book, you're in the land of communication. Pick up the phone and communicate with people. Do the research. Draft the strongest possible letter you can then to that person. Take the time. It might seem like a real pain in the backside, but take that time to do that, because this is you selling yourself and your book. You're showing yourself to be that sellable commodity at that point. Your book, it sounds thoughtful, at this point it is secondary, because you're introducing yourself, you're showing them what you've got to some extent, you're getting them engaged in the story. I know an author that had written the first quarter of her book. She was so excited with it, she went off and spoke to Carly Anderson, one of the biggest literary agents in London. She was a fantastic salesperson, sold him completely. He said, let's have that book, I really want to read that book. She never delivered it, because she couldn't finish writing the book. She got so hung up on the fact that this big guy wanted to read it, it was never going to be good enough at that point. So if she had completed the work first off and then done all of that work, happy days for her, but she never completed. So opportunities can also go by the fact that you are jumping the gun again.
How did she manage to get to see him?
She didn't get to see him, she actually rang up and actually inquired and got through to him. And she was quite lucky, and she was quite a confident person, was able to actually speak to him and sell herself in that instance, and the book, the idea behind the book. And he loved that idea, but and she keeps saying, oh, he'll, I'm still working on it. 15 years have passed. He's not going to remember, There's a lot of water under the bridge.
15 years.
Yeah. It's true.
I have actually just published a novel that was written 45 years ago.
Yeah.
How long?
It was written 45 years ago.
45 years?
Oh,
Yeah, so he actually wrote it when he was a graduate at university, just graduating, and he became a very successful writer in non-fiction, and he'd written this novel, and we've now published it. It's doing very well.
It's now working on the second. It's due to be delivered, what, 2009?
No, so and he's delivered the second within 6 months.
Oh, there you go.
So it's quite interesting once he kicked off. But you're right, yeah, I don't think I would be waiting for that. But that's quite interesting how that happened, because if he hadn't had that there, you know, that one-off, chance of it working is so slim. But this is the thing. I think one of the things to take away is that none of us really know what we're doing. We just don't. You know, we might say we do, and we can talk a good talk, but we're learning every single day because it is just so difficult out there.
It's changing.
Yeah. Well, what was that bestseller last year? Stoner?
Yeah.
Was it? That book was written in what,
66,
67?
Yeah.
You know, he died of alcoholism, didn't he? Or you know, did nothing, and then out of nowhere, people started talking about it. Became a massive bestseller.
Waterstones made a book of the month, I think, throughout their stores.
Yeah.
And that was big help on that one.
Girl with the Dragon Tattoo is a good story. So who's read that?
I was horrified by that book, and I found it very distressing. You know.
Well, the thing is that you shouldn't have actually been able to read it, because Quercus bought the rights and it bombed massively, and he had printed 80,000 copies, and he literally had 75,000 sitting in the warehouse, and he paid a huge amount of money for the rights. And what he did is he just took bags and bags of these books and left them all around London. Left them everywhere. Benches, tube, trains, cafes, for free. Just left them.
Like people do with Bibles.
Yeah, exactly. And just left them lying around, and 6 months later, it went stratospheric. Became a massive hit, and fortunately he had the rights to the other two. They were even bigger, then the film deal. But he had to literally give away 50,000 copies to turn it into a success.
Well, I didn't like it.
But that was a great market.
But you still bought it?
No, I didn't. I got it.
Well, not another person who gets free books.
Oh, no, I think I'm not sure if I got it from the library or... No, I saw it in the library and I was horrified that it was in the library. I think I might have bought it originally, you know, because I saw the 3 and I thought, oh, well, it must be quite good because there's 3 in the series. Do you know what I mean? So
see,
I'll start with the first.
That's quite an interesting point, because one of the issues between self-publishing and...
I didn't read it all. When I got to that awful bit, it gave me nightmares. Yeah, so self-publishing and traditional publishing, there's a big thing around series now, because of that 90%. You know, that they read 1 or 2. I know plenty of people who read 1 or 2. This is why 50 Shades worked in the end, because they could immediately go on to the next 2 books, even though they're just repeats of book 1. It didn't matter. It was almost like a cultural phenomenon. They just hoovered it up. But when traditional publishers do it, it's a sign of quality, or it seems to be a sign of commitment. And there's a different attitude about it. It's quite interesting, because it's not seen by readers then as a sign of, you know, just churning it out and page turners. It's a sign of, God, if they committed to 3 books like that. But it also works for the publisher in terms of revenue, because bookshops are less risk averse then, because they'll say, well, if there's 3 books, we're not taking a punt on a new debut author. It's someone who knows how to write, because they're on the 3rd book. And they're more likely to take, you know, 50 of the new one, but they might take 20 of the others. So it's quite an interesting idea going on.
Even E.L. James, though, she started as self-published, and it was fan fiction.
Yeah, there was
the Twilight series by Stephanie May.
There was over 20,000 copies floating around.
That's how she picked up her publishing deal. The books are shocking. You read them, they're absolutely shocking. They're not good at all, but fantastic marketing. I mean, the covers, the way they linked everything, the stands, the displays in the stores, even if you went into Asda, they just looked good. And the marketing was fabulous.
But there was something very clever about that, because 50 Shades, it worked because people could read it anonymously, right? So it became a bestseller on Kindle.
Yeah.
So it meant that people could read it and no one would know that they were reading erotica.
Yeah.
Okay? Now what Random House did, they were very, very clever. What they did was they said, you don't need that, read the book, because then you're going to be an empowered reader. And it worked. Because I remember sitting on the train, I told you this story, sitting on the train,
woman sitting opposite me in a business suit with a copy of when it was first published. I remember saying to her, look, you know, I hope you don't think this is a weird question, I'm a publisher. I'm just intrigued about why you bought the paperback. So, because everyone was reading this on Kindle. I said, I want you to know I'm reading it. It was like a badge of honour. You know, it's like, you know what, I can read this stuff because I'm a grown-up, and you can't tell me I can't read it. I mean, can you imagine if I got out a copy of Razzle or something and said, well, you know, here's my copy of Penthouse, I'm going to read this because but, you know, it was interesting because then so many people bought into that. I don't think they actually enjoyed the book or read it because there's that thing, you know, Oxfam have built a building out of the free copies.
Most left behind in hotels.
Most left behind book ever, yeah.
In hotels, especially, yeah.
But it became a weird. It isn't actually reflective of publishing because when Gray came out, the fourth one,
which was a rewrite of the first one.
Which was a rewrite of the first one, but from a
perspective.
different viewpoint.
Yeah.
I mean, the most crass piece of publishing you've ever seen in your life. The first week it came out, they had 300,000 pre-orders, right? 300,000. It went straight to number one. The second best-selling book that week was by Ian McEwan. How many copies do you think it sold?
4,000.
Close. 5,500 copies. And that was the second best.